يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Mirza, and I'm your host for today's show, Dear Soul. The world has become a global village. We are interconnected now more than ever. In these times, it has borne fruits, especially during this pandemic, where we have connected with Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, may Allah be his helper, in virtual mulaqats. There's also has been a greater adoption of technology and entertainment with younger generations. Today's children are highly functioning with various technological softwares, apps, and entertainment through school or personal leisure. However, the pitfalls are apparent as more children and adults are struggling with sleep disturbances, emotional and social dysregulation, diminished academic and work performance, and mental health issues. Before we begin, I would like to share that if you'd like to stay updated with this show, follow us on Twitter at MKAC Studios. And if any of our episodes resonated with you and you'd like to stay up to date and provide feedback on what you liked, disliked, or what you learned, or you would like to pitch us a topic for us to cover, please reach out at our email contact@mkacstudios.ca. In our season finale, which is today's episode, my guests with me are Mirza Qamar Ahmed from Calgary, Alberta, and Fateen Ahmed Riaz from Toronto, Canada. Qamar was born in Pakistan and raised in Canada. He is a finance professional working in corporate banking and currently serving as local guide Calgary West. Qamar enjoys all sporting activities, including hockey and skiing, and has an interest in reading. Welcome to the show, Qamar Bhai. Fateen was born and raised in Toronto and is currently in his final year at Jamia Ahmadiyya, Canada. When he's not writing his thesis or buried in books, he enjoys nature and staying active. Jazakumullah khair for accepting our invite, Fateen. Brothers, today our final episode of season 1 of Dear Soul is a conversation about striking the balance between our smartphone use and spirituality. We're all guilty of this, but I think it's important to be open about it so we hold accountability, especially as we enter this month of Ramadan, and our audience will be tuning in then. Qamar Bhai, before we dive into the gist of all this, could you share your own relationship to social media and the digital world, and to give our audience an idea of where your perspectives might be coming from?
Jazakallah Shakil, and welcome to everyone on the panel. This is a fantastic topic, as our engagement with social media within years has gone exponential. And so when it comes to my relationship, initially it started with utilizing some of these main social media platforms, such as text messaging, Facebook, and this was during university. And as my life has evolved, I'm a little bit older now, my usage has, I've limited as best as I can. So now I'm on one platform, which is LinkedIn. It's for professional purposes. The second platform is Twitter, and that is where I can follow individuals that are interesting, knowledgeable in different fields. And I try to regulate myself as best as possible. It is an ongoing struggle, as you mentioned. However, my interaction is limited to those two apps, and I have removed myself from any other app. And so this is an endeavor to limit my usage. But again, it's an ongoing battle in order to ensure, because there's something new getting rolled out every month, actually weekly, and it's how do you keep yourself away from that? And so it's an ongoing battle. I think it's something that all of us struggle with. But at this moment, it's just limited to those two platforms. And I try not to wake up every morning and check them because that's a very difficult thing. And I'm sure we're going to get to that later today, inshallah.
Jazakallah. Fateen, you're a Jamia student, and we've all heard about what Jamia students' relationship like is with the internet use and the digital media. Could you share more about that?
For sure, and Jazakallah Shakil Sahib and Qamar Sahib for joining us on this panel today. And as you very rightfully pointed out, I think everybody by now knows that devices of any sort are not allowed in Jamia Ahmadiyya. And this goes for all around the world, and our Jamia is no different. I'm in my 7th year now, and because I have to write my thesis and there are other tasks and responsibilities given to the 7th year students, now I'm finally allowed to have my laptop. And even that, let me make clear, not in class, but at the hostels. So we're allowed to have our laptops in the hostels to work on our theses and exams and so on and so forth. But if I can be completely honest with you guys here, I think I liked it better when there was no permission for laptops. I think I liked it better when I didn't have my phone with me in Jamia, because we were also allowed phones, the 7th year students, that is. And that's because, as Qamar Sahib rightfully mentioned, it is a huge distraction. And these things are designed to distract us. And they do an exceptional job at that. And so when you have your target, when you have your goals, and you're just trying to strive for those goals, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and all of these social mediums are just another distraction. So I think, personally speaking, I liked it much more when we didn't have these devices. Obviously, you can do research. Google is there, but definitely it was something that I'm probably going to miss, because for the rest of my life, as the world is progressing, as you mentioned, it's a global village. I'm going to need those things, and everybody needs those things, because that's just the way our society works now. It runs on those things. And so I really will miss that, not having that, and just focusing on what I really need to focus on.
Of course, there's a nostalgia, especially for us, mid 90s, early 90s children, where we remember a time where we used to play without, like apps and phones. So there is, I sense a nostalgia that you're sensing for these past few years, where, you wanted to be without your phone. And I do get that, especially when I think about my earlier years. And you're right about, these social medias are designed to distract us. And Qamar Bhai is going to talk to us about, social media design. And before I go into it, we're going to speak later on the social dilemma that I'd like to propose, which is a documentary on Netflix that talked about social media use. And one of the, the top digital gurus, his name is Tristan Harris. He says that, social media isn't a tool that is just waiting to be used. It has its own goals, and it has its own means of pursuing them. And so, you're right. At some point, it does distract us, and the algorithms are there. And speaking about algorithms, Qamar Bhai, can you talk more about how social media is designed for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And Fateen Bhai, please do add your value as I go through this. I want to take a step back. In finance, there's a principle called there's no such thing as a free lunch. And we all know when we go to Jalsa, we get a free lunch. That's different. Us Ahmadis were very lucky, mashallah, that we do get a free lunch. However, that concept, what it means is there's no such thing as a free product, okay? And let's take a step back in terms of explaining that. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Essentially, it's in all of our bodies as a chemical. And what it's responsible for is regulating the neural system, specifically pleasure. And so when we talk about dopamine, our devices, social media, with these pings, notifications, these triggers we get, the vibration on our phone, they're designed, and there's a lot of investment made in the type of sound, the duration of the sound, to trigger that dopamine. And essentially what it does is the body becomes addicted to dopamine. And that's seen with individuals who unfortunately fall into drug use. They fall into other things that they're reliant on to get that dopamine rush. Now, when we talk about dopamine, just like anything, for an individual who works out, after you start doing 10 repetitions, your muscles get used to it. So in order to have further incremental gain, you need to do 12, 14, 16, 18. And it's the same thing with dopamine. Once you get a baseline dopamine, you need more and more to get that incremental lift. And you can see that certainly when you look at social media. You know, people are more than on one platform. You open up your phone, 99% of the time, you don't just check one app, you check several apps. And so when we talk about the addictiveness of social media, that's exactly what it's designed for. And in the background, I'm sure many people have done research, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. These algorithms are designed to actually make sure you stay on that device when you open your phone for as long as possible. And so that is something where the system is designed to defeat you mentally. Okay, so let's think about that. The system is designed to keep you on your device. Think about a good friend. You know, we'll go back to the 80s. Imagine you're living on the street as your best friend, but he's at your door every single day, knocking and saying, hey, I want to spend more time with you. I want to spend more time with you. Eventually you'll get sick of him. But these devices are now designed so that chemically you become reliant on them, that you have to spend all your time with them. And so when we look at people's phone usage, you know, there was a university study done where a professor came into a classroom, he said, what's your average time you spend on your phone? And most people said, okay, 2-3 hours. Then they downloaded an app, and this was at the University of Nevada in the United States. And they actually looked at the usage. It was 7, 8, 9 hours. And so individuals are now on their screens. And some people argue, okay, well, we're on there because we're connected to the world, we're doing research, etc. But mentally, it's not possible to be doing that much research and not engage in other activity. So 3 to 4 hours of your life, 5 hours of your life, you're spending just engaging with individuals all the time. And so that has a lot of impact on your mental health. You develop a lot of poor habits. As Shakil had mentioned, it impacts your sleep. People are staying awake longer because they're on their phones. Also, the light that the phones transmit are really bad for your eyes. And so eventually you sleep really poorly as well because your eyes are fatigued. And so there's many elements to it in terms of the addictiveness, but you have to remember the system is designed to keep you on that app longer. And so it is designed to defeat you. And when you think of it that way, when you download an app, make sure you think about what you're downloading, whether it's adding value to your life. Because again, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The app download might be free, but the data they're collecting on you, all that information that you're providing is getting sold to other organizations, but also it's taking away from time you can spend somewhere else. So in terms of the addictiveness, I would say that is the main thing I wanted to cover in terms of what happens neurologically, but also the poor habits we develop. And certainly in the remaining part of the program, we're going to go into the memory that individuals that are on their phones longer, their memory gets impacted too because they're so used to getting quick information, and as well as a self-esteem issue. So inshallah, we'll go into that. But in terms of the addictiveness, just remember that there's no such thing as a free lunch. These apps are designed to keep you on there longer and take time away from other valuable things in life.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about, apps monitoring how long you spend on their apps, the duration. One thing that I never really thought of that came up during my, research and putting this program together is that, WhatsApp has a feature where if someone is typing, that it comes up as saying this individual is typing. So you have that app open for longer, waiting and expecting them to respond. And if they're not typing, then that feature is not there. And so it adds on to the time that you're spending on the phone. And it never really occurred to me until now is that, as you said, they're designed to keep us engaged. And that's just a trick way of telling us, hey, like that person is responding to you, but it's more so about you staying on the app than you two connecting. So it really boggles my mind, and how much we come to know is like how like chained we are to these apps. And like speaking of like engagement and connection, you're a working individual in corporate finance, you're working from home, you've been you're surrounded by technology, and then you come home and you have a family to raise, you're a local guide, you have to interact with people. How do you stay disconnected from it all? Like, you go from work, we're surrounded by tech, and then you want to be on your phone. Like, how do you manage your personal leisure that you have left working 40 hours, and now you're trying to mitigate how much time you spend on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is certainly a concern, not only for individuals in the Jamaat, but out in the outside world, where people are feeling fatigued because they're carrying their work with them wherever they go. You might come home, but you have your phone. And again, the phones are designed so that for whatever reason, you feel the need to check your email or your WhatsApp to see if anyone's messaged you or if there's any work items available. There's so many times earlier on in my career where I came home, and 3-4 times during the night after I returned home, I would be checking my email, even though I knew likely there wasn't anything in there. Again, it's very habitual that you start developing these habits. And so first thing that I want to cover, and I hope if anyone takes anything away from this chat, is distance yourself away from your devices as much as you can. Wherever you can, allow your devices to be in a different room than you. And I'll give a couple of stories. But one thing, alhamdulillah, I was blessed with a daughter 3 years ago, and now she's at an age where she wants to interact. And once I'm home, I will leave my phone in a different room to ensure that she gets the attention she deserves. And the primary reason is before, when I used to come home, she would be talking to me and I would be looking at my phone, and we weren't making that eye contact. And eye contact is scientifically proven. It's very important for children to learn to make eye contact for their developmental needs. And so in essence, I've started to separate myself from the devices. Yeah, certainly the messages sometimes pile up, especially from our regional guide, who is always messaging us he's doing his job. But it is also more efficient. You can answer in 10 minutes, you can answer all those messages versus looking at it every 10 minutes, waiting for the next message. So I think you need to distance yourself away from devices. But another thing we're going to talk about later today is many times we identify the issue, but what's the alternative? What can you fill your life with? So now you're feeling a void, right? And so what can you fill your life with in that void? And inshallah, we're going to go into that a little bit deeper. But the main thing I would say, Shakil, is we need to distance ourselves from our devices, and we need to find fulfilling alternatives that add long-term value to our lives. And that is the biggest struggle right now for teenagers is, okay, we get off our devices, how should we fill that void?
And this generation, alhamdulillah, you have a daughter that's 3 years, and it really gets you wondering, like, what kind of society are kids going to live in? Like the generation where, the generation before them, like post 1999, these kids, as soon as they hit preteens, they were, enamored by, Instagram and social media and phones. It became widely accepted once the 1999 kids started entering high school, whereas back when I was in high school, entering high school, there was probably only one kid who had a phone in our whole class. And so, this really gets us thinking about our kids and our future. Right now, the documentary of Social Dilemma, one of the cast, his name's Tristan Harris, he says that there's a whole generation that is more anxious, more fragile, and more depressed. There was actually a study that was conducted in Ontario during the first wave of the pandemic. They did a self-report survey of 3,100 students in Ontario, and they found that those students reported a 73% of the 3,100 students reported an increase in boredom, 55% reported loneliness, 43% reported stress, and 38% of those 3,100 kids were anxious. And this may have continued as, the pandemic has lasted for 2 years, and it still hasn't, as we're returning back, there's still people getting sick. There's still people that are passing away. And so this really, challenges kids who were, online for 2 years, who didn't have that social and developmental challenges. And so there's this really vicious cycle of our digital world and our relationship with it. And it's a vicious cycle that, hurts us through, heightening our negative emotions. It has caused anxiety and depression. And so Qamar bhai, what can you share, as a parent and as someone who's grown up in this institution, academic institution and workplace, what can someone do to adopt healthier coping strategies with their mental health challenges?
Yeah, and by all means, like mental health is such a vast scope of study, and so we with the time we have, we can only go into certain focus. But first of all, if you're struggling, certainly get help. That's the first thing I would say is if you're struggling, seek a professional. But in terms of some things that you can do that add value in your life, as I was saying previously, get away from your devices, right? These anxiousness, a self-esteem issue is very real. You are seeing on social media people putting the best image of themselves constantly, whether it's through filtered photos of themselves, whether it's their financial circumstances, whether it's successes that they've had. Individuals that are on these social media platforms are sharing the best of themselves. Absolutely, they also share the worst, and that is a true reality where people do share things that have happened to them that are unfortunate. But for the most part, people are sharing the best part of themselves. So imagine when you are picking up this device constantly, you're a child, whether a teenager or even an adult, and you see someone who is clearly sharing the best of themselves, and perhaps they do have accomplishments, you are going to feel an innate need that I am not good enough. And imagine if that is getting reiterated on a daily basis. So certainly there are going to be self-esteem issues. There's going to be anxiety that, hey, I need to be better. I need to perform better. And so all these things, and Shakil Bhai was referencing a documentary where there was a certain spike in the early 2000s in all these cases. So what happened is there was a baseline for the depression, anxiety, and then in the 2000s, late 2000s, when social media took effect, all these cases, they increased. And so the correlation was social media. And so when we say, okay, you need to stop usage, what should we replace it with? And I would say we need to go back to the teachings of Islam and of the Prophet Messiah, where the Quran says, go seek the world, go explore it. And so did the Prophet Messiah. He used to say, when I'm traveling, I feel closer to God. So obviously, not everyone can travel. Not everyone has the means to do certain things. But what I would say is you have to experience life, okay? And you don't need economic means in order to experience life. And what I mean by experience is having deep and meaningful relationships. There was a nurse in Australia who for 10 years worked in palliative care. So individuals that were about to pass away, she would be taking care of them for their last month or 2 months of their life. Her name was Dr. Corney. And after 10 years approximately serving, she wrote a book. And she said the number one regret that people had out of 5 that she had identified was having meaningful relationships. So imagine now you're 75 and 80 years old. You're looking back at your life. I can guarantee you your regret won't be, I wish I had a better social media game. Your main regret will be, I wish I had more meaningful relationships. And so for children listening to this, they'll say, well, what does that mean? And what I mean by meaningful relationship is bonds are developed, especially in brotherhood, is by doing activities together, by playing sports, by perhaps being creative and doing some projects, whether it's for the Jamaat or for school together. And again, it goes back to being physical presence with each other, exchanging those emotions. This, yes, social media completes those things. You know, if you're on FaceTime, et cetera, today we're on FaceTime, but we don't have the benefit of being in the same room and reading our full body language. We don't have the benefit of, hey, giving each other props, which again has a chemical reaction, which your mind triggers, which our bodies are not triggering these days. And so I would say focus on experience versus actual experience, getting out in the world versus sitting behind a screen. You know, I want to give a story. Everyone has older brothers and sisters, and sometimes they don't have the best of relationships, but they're in different parts of their life. So my older brother, he's about 6 years older. And, I was always the younger brother who was a thorn on his side, right? And after a while, you grow out of it. But the reason I want to tell this story is because it's something that him and I recall all the time. So this was in 2015, and we said, okay, let's go on an experience together. So we decided we would do a 30-kilometer hike and overnight camp in northern Alberta. And we were very unprepared for it. In many ways, we didn't have the right equipment, but we said, Jalo, let's go. We'll go experience this. And throughout, we encountered obstacles. There was rain. We didn't have the right equipment. We couldn't start a fire. But those memories, we still recount until today. And that bond that was developed is what holds us together. Similarly, in the early 2000s, I used to live in Peace Village, and we used to play ball hockey outside in the winter in the parking lot of the masjid. And until this day, when I see those individuals who I played with, I don't keep in touch with them. But when I see them, we recall those memories. And those memories have such a strong connection that will keep you empowered in life. When you see those individuals, you wish them well, you have this deep-rooted belief that you just want them to do well, and it's reciprocated. And so these experiences tie yourself together. The one thing I also want to say, I want to go back, is this onus is also on parents. So parents listening to this, everyone has different socioeconomic status. So yes, not everyone can afford a vacation to have experiences. Not everyone can afford, outings on the weekend. Going for coffees, etc. But you can do little things to add value to your children's lives where they're having good experiences with you. Again, experiences are proven to hold relationships together longer. So whether it's playing a board game or perhaps going for a walk, these are very low-cost experiences that long-term have a huge investment and implications on your children's lives. So focus on experience. Experience is extremely important. And these are alternatives to being on your screen. And I would say, watching Netflix is not an experience with your family. That's still social media, right? If you are in front of a screen, that's not an experience. A shared experience is something where you are fully connected. And that is extremely important for building long-term bonds. And I think that's one of the biggest things that are missing in society today, is actually experiencing life outside your home and away from your screen. That also is not only healthy for you, but it creates a long-term impact on you. I can't, when I think about good times in my life, I don't think about, oh, that guy had an amazing tweet, or that person had so many likes. I don't remember, all those stats. What I do remember is those physical experiences that we went out and did certain activity together that you will remember for the rest of your life. So I hope that kind of answers a little bit of that question. And Fateen, certainly if you have anything to add there, please do.
Jazakallah, Qamar bhai, that was amazing. It was really much needed about the message we want to get across to adults and children as well, whether these children are younger or older, or whether these adults are younger or older. I think what you've shared is a universal message that gets across. Pivoting this conversation from mental health, we also want to touch on spirituality. Now, our faith, it can be a source of hindrance, or it could be also a source of a protective factor for our mental health. And spirituality is a sort of, it's like a very deep philosophy that we barely touch on. I think as Muslims, we grow up in this culture of the do's and don'ts, the religious framework that do this and you'll get to heaven. Don't do this, you'll get to heaven. But if you do this, then you go to hell. But we really never touch on, the framework behind it, the why. Why do we need, why do we need answers to such questions? And, episode 2 and episode 4 touch on a little bit about the why, the whys in our life. And I'd like to pivot this now to Fateen bhai, and I'd like to ask him, in terms of spirituality and how it sort of, shapes our mental health, I'd like you to more so talk about the beginning of spirituality. Like, what is spirituality in the Islamic sense?
Jazakallah, Shakil Sahib, and again, beautifully explicated by Qamar Sahib. And I hope that you can also add some. Definitely, you will have some things to add and some input that's going to be necessary. So, again, feel free. You as well, Shakil Sahib. I think it's very fitting that this show is called Dear Soul, and that's because we're talking about spirituality, as you mentioned. And if we're addressing the soul, if we're saying dear soul, if we're trying to connect with our soul, as many people do, but in my humble opinion, very few people do successfully. If we're trying to do this, we ought to know what the soul is. Who are we talking to? Now, to give this example, and this example, has been given by the Khulafa and the Promised Messiah alayhi salam as well. We have a physical body, and this body of ours has certain requirements, certain demands. And if we don't fulfill those demands, our body will not function. And this, even a layman, and perhaps I should even say even a child can understand this, that if we don't eat, what will happen? Eventually, we're going to starve. If we don't drink water or some fluids, eventually we're going to die of dehydration. And if we don't breathe, even for a few moments, it's not going to be long before we die. Now, there are certain examples of ill health. So people who drink, eat, and breathe, but they do so in a way that is not conducive to their physical well-being. Now, you can eat, but if all you eat is junk food, I don't need to tell you or anyone who's watching this what's going to happen. If someone drinks fluids, but they only drink pop, what's going to happen? And if somebody breathes, but instead they supplement it with smoking or any other drug or bad habit, what's going to happen? Now, these things, I don't need to tell you the consequences of these things. They're in front of us, and we examine them and we realize them on a daily basis. Now, what happens when we take care of ourselves? When we exercise adequately, when we fuel our body with healthy food, with water, and especially now I've seen, there's a huge fervor about working out, staying active. And I'm sure you've seen with the Khuddam as well. I would be, and I'm sure you would be as well, I would be hard pressed to find any Khadim who has either not bought a gym membership in the last 3 to 4 years or has not thought about buying a gym membership over the last 3 or 4 years. Everyone, and our Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya included, it realizes that this is conducive to good health for whatever reason. They want to look good, they want to feel good, they want to be active, athletes, so on and so forth. But no one can deny the benefits of eating well and doing good to your body. However, I also want to touch upon the certitude, the certainty we have, or should I say the lack thereof, of our spiritual self. The fact that what we do affects not only our physical body, but also our spiritual body is something that I feel really needs to be emphasized. As I've mentioned, a conscious effort has been given to eating healthy. And God the Almighty has also talked about this, kulu washrabu, God says, that eat and drink, wala tusrifu, but don't exceed the bounds. And so as we've begun to understand our bodies better, our diet better, we begin to understand what these bounds are. And so, we have dietitians and we have people, scientists or so on and so forth, to tell us these things. So who do we turn to when it comes to our spiritual welfare, right? And a lot of people, especially nowadays, they'll call themselves, I'm sure you guys have heard of it, the movement that's called spiritual but not religious, or spiritual but not affiliated. And so these people, they think that we need to turn to ourselves for our spiritual nourishment. But what's perplexing is that these same people, they acknowledge the existence of a soul, and very rightfully so. but they do not acknowledge the person who created, the being who created the soul. It's only fitting that the one who created the soul tell us how to nurture that soul, right? God says in the Holy Quran, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask thee concerning the soul. قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Say, the soul is a matter from my Lord. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And regarding the knowledge of the soul, you have been given but little. So God the Almighty is telling us that regarding the knowledge of the soul, I have given you very little knowledge regarding that. But little is not nothing. And that's something that we need to understand. So the spiritual nourishment that we need ought to be derived from the being, from the entity who has created that soul in the first place. And so these people who say that I'm spiritual but not religious, it's a fallacy of the highest degree, because spirituality has to be tied to God the Almighty, because our spirit, as I mentioned before, was created by Him and cannot reasonably exist without Him. And so there is no spirituality without God. And people's desire for spirituality, even if they're atheists, you'll hear it a lot, or Christians, I just want to be spiritual. I just don't want to be bound to certain commandments. This is indicative of a greater human desire, because the soul throngs to God. It jumps to God, because the God is the creator of the soul, right? In the Holy Quran, God, in another place, God the Almighty says, before everyone was created, God the Almighty asks the souls of all of mankind, Alastu bi rabbikum? Am I not your Lord? Qalu bala. They said, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, you are our creator, you are our Lord. So it only makes sense that in order for us to gain more knowledge about spirituality, we turn to the being, the entity who created us. And something else I wanted to touch upon regarding this is our Khuddam, and in fact the entire world, we see athletes, and the craft that they perfect is something that we are completely inspired with. I know personally, I've grown up watching basketball along with many other Khuddam, and I've seen, I'm sure you guys have as well, LeBron James and Steph Curry, and we see how they perfect their craft, and we come to admire it so much. And nowadays, especially after Kobe Bryant passed away, we hear stories about his work ethic, how he used to approach the game. Why do we not look at our spiritual leaders with that same sense of admiration, of inspiration? The Khulafa, the promised Messiah, and above all else, the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? He was, if we have any role model at all, who is that role model? It's certainly not LeBron James, right? It's the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And so he is our ultimate role model. And it is through his teaching that we can learn about our soul, about spirituality. So I just wanted to kind of touch upon that the sources are there, the Holy Quran is there. And so that's where we need to go for guidance regarding our spiritual nourishment.
I'd just like to quickly follow up on that, Shakib. Fateen beautifully just put together, what many people, I think, sometimes forget is the perfection of a craft. And as he mentioned, there's a lot of individuals who work hard in the darkness, not in the spotlight. And when they achieve these results, sometimes those get highlighted on social media, and people forget that in order to get there, you have to work hard. There's no substitute for working hard. And as was beautifully mentioned, spiritually, you have to work hard. But what I want to encourage individuals as well is work hard on yourselves. Just as Fateen said, the Quran and the Holy Prophet Muhammad, there's countless examples of when they came up against conflict, they said, oh Allah, please help me. Oh Allah, please help me with this. So when you get out of your comfort zone, when you become vulnerable and try to achieve and seek, you will find, but you will only turn to your creator to seek that success. And I've seen it countless times where people perhaps that maybe in the beginning of their journey were not as spiritual, through this struggle, through this perhaps vulnerability, they found Allah because they said, I have no one to turn to. I have worked hard. I have done every single thing to put me in a position to be successful. But one thing I haven't done is perhaps ask my creator that if this is for my betterment, please allow me to succeed. So with this vulnerability, with this aim to perfect your craft, you will automatically become closer to Allah, even if you are not in the beginning, because you will realize at the end of the day, hard work, you can do it. There's a lot of other individuals doing it, but perhaps that extra element that you were initially forgetting is that blessing. So Jazakallah Fateen for beautifully summing that up.
Fateen bhai, there's this aspect of, you know, our spirituality that is tied to a lot of things, our actions, but you know, our intentions behind those actions. And you know, there's this aspect of you know, social media where it blurs the lines, and we might have good intentions starting out with social media, but it kind of gets, you know, bumpy along the way. What do you find are the impacts of social media and just, you know, the digital world on our spirituality, whether it's positive or negative, that you'd like to highlight?
Before I go into this, I want to make this precursor very clear. And I think there's a very deep wisdom behind why this, what I'm about to say, this hadith, is the very first hadith placed in the very first chapter of Bukhari by Hazrat Imam Bukhari. And we've heard it growing up, that innamal a'malu bin niyat, that actions are judged by their intentions. So that means that no action in and of itself is wrong. Take any example, take any action. Under the right circumstances, that action is a moral action, a virtuous action. And in a completely different circumstance, that same action is deemed immoral, is deemed sinful and wrong altogether. Take the example of killing, of taking someone's life. Under the wrong circumstances, inappropriate circumstances, that is a felony of the highest degree. First degree murder is a felony of the highest degree in every court of law. Now, if the government, for example, decides to punish someone for the crimes they have committed and executes that person, now such an action would be considered justice. And so, again, no action in and of itself is wrong. And social media is no different. There are right ways to utilize social media, as Qamar Sahib beautifully mentioned, and there are wrong ways to utilize it. And more often than not, we see the wrong ways to use social media. That's not to say, again, that there aren't the right ways to use it. And the Holy Quran has made very clear that certain things certain inventions will come about that will be the cause for the propagation of Islam, right? God, the Almighty says, وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, and when people are brought together. And so when we look at social media, you can be chatting with someone, you can be looking at someone's tweets, you can be looking at someone's profile that lives all the way at the other end of the globe. But it seems like it's on the face of your screen. And so people have truly been brought together in an interconnected world, just as you said in the beginning. And regarding the spreading of content, God the Almighty has also said, وَإِذَا الصُّحُفُ نُشِرَتْ, that when books are spread abroad, and social media, if used appropriately, can be a tool that you can gain so much knowledge from social media, as we all benefit from it. For example, Twitter. If I take my personal example, I follow people who are posting articles or posting about the news, or Al-Hakam, or Review of Religions, or all these other media platforms, these social media platforms that Jamaat has come out with especially. So it's definitely in the way we use that thing that makes a thing right or wrong. It's nothing intrinsic about that thing in and of itself. Now, social media, and Qamar Sahib mentioned this, he mentioned this in passing. When you look at someone posting something, they are posting the very best of what that thing is. If they're posting, for example, they'll only post money when they have money. They will only post pictures of cars when they have cars. No one's going to post something that they don't have, right? And then we fall into this comparison. They say that comparison is the theft of joy. And social media speaks volumes to that. Like, you look at that, and in my thesis for Jamia, I researched a little bit about Instagram and the effect that it has on teenage girls specifically. And New York Times did a piece on that. And more than 50% of teenage girls are negatively affected. Their mental health deteriorates every time they visit Instagram, which is multiple times an hour even. So this comparison, this spiraling comparison that we fall into is something that Islam categorically forbids. And so, a rule of thumb for all of the Khuddam and whoever is watching this is that Islam teaches us that when it comes to physical means, look at those with less than you. When it comes to spiritual means, spiritual progress, look to those who are greater than you, right? So it's through the adoption of these qualities that Islam teaches that we can truly find happiness. And so there's definitely, as you said, the line is a little bit blurry when it comes to what's right and what's wrong. But taqwa, the demands of taqwa, that is righteousness, demand that one stay very close to, doesn't even approach that which is wrong, right? That's the beauty of Islam. In Christianity, for example, the teaching is that you can look at a woman, but you can't look at a woman with ill intentions. But God the Almighty says, وَلَا تَقْرِبُوا الزِّنَا. Do not even go near there. Don't even think about it, right? Because if you go there, then it's going to incite certain desires and certain things within you. And so I just want to share something from Hazur Anwar Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz about social media in particular. He says that the evils of these days include television and internet. Hazur states that you can observe this in most homes, that the eldest to the youngest are not offering Fajr Salat on time because they were either watching television or were online on the internet until late night, watching some program, and as a result, they could not wake up on time. In fact, such people do not even realize that they have to get up for Salat in the morning. Both the internet and TV and similar useless things not only cause you to miss your Salat once or twice, but those who fall victim to this behavior get into this habit of watching programs until late at night or sitting on the internet. And then it becomes difficult for the prayer in the morning. And such people may not even get up at a reasonable time, let alone the Fajr prayer, because people fail to give any importance to Salat. So our relationship with social media should not come at the cost, as Hazur Anwar is mentioning, of our Salat. Our Salat is something that is paramount and is the most important means of strength. And Hazur Anwar Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, I'm sure many of us and most of us have had the opportunity to pray behind him and see him pray. And once a Jamia student, one of my seniors was talking about this, and I still remember the word he used describing Hazur Anwar's prayer. He said Hazur prays in a very delicate way. His prayer is very delicate. And he further said that we try to find our strength in something else other than prayer. And even during prayer, we often find our minds wandering towards something. Okay, we have to do this and this and this. But righteous men such as Hazur Anwar Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, and the Khulafa and the Promised Messiah Islam and so forth, they seek their strength from prayer itself. So we need to keep in mind the importance of Salat and balance our social media use, and never forget that Salat, when it's time for Salat, if you pray your Salat on time and the way it ought to be performed, then inshallah God the Almighty will guide you and you will be saved from the ill effects of social media. right? And you will be only guided to that which is good for you. Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That salat is the only thing that can protect you from munkar, from manifest evil. And we see this evil all around us. So this is something that I really wanted to emphasize when it comes to social media use.
Jazakallah, Fateen bhai. And you brought up, which will lead us to our next question about being mindful in our prayers. I'd like to present our audience a book that I was recently reading. It's called Digital Minimalism. It was written by an author called, his name was Cal Newport. And before he written this book, he wrote a book called Deep Work. And he shared his thoughts on the need for intense focus and being less distracted at work. And when it became like widely acclaimed and people started following him, they actually asked him for more. They said that, Cal, you told us that how to stay less distracted at work, but how do we disconnect from our distractions in our personal lives? And, Newport in his book talks about a concept called solitude deprivation. And he defines this as a state in which you spend close to zero time alone with your own thoughts and free from the input of other minds. Fateen bhai, in this age of constant hurry and movement, both online and in reality, how does one concentrate with their own being and find pleasure in their prayer where their mind is constantly racing and thinking, as you said, thinking about the next thing?
Absolutely. Salat is our lifeline. If we view it as a burden, it will become a burden. And the promised Messiah ﷺ says that such a person who does not enjoy salat should pray it and think it to be a medicine, a bitter medicine. The promised Messiah ﷺ says that if he does this so on, and is continuous in his efforts, then there's going to come a time where he will be cured, and salat will begin to become pleasurable to him. And in another instance, he says that just as, and Qamar Sahib was expounding on this in the beginning about dopamine. And there's a baseline of dopamine that once you've hit that baseline, you want more. And once you hit that, you want even more, right? And the Prophet ﷺ says that just as a drunkard, someone who drinks alcohol very often, when he drinks alcohol, the first time, one bottle will be enough for him. But the next time he needs 2, and the next time he needs 3, right? Prophet ﷺ likens this to salat. He says, if you stand on the prayer mat and if you're praying, lekin maza nahi aata. The Prophet ﷺ says, keep praying. Don't lift your head from the sujood. Keep praying. Just as a drunkard drinks and drinks and drinks until he is satiated, Prophet ﷺ says, don't raise your head until you are satiated. So we have to keep in mind this. It's a constant effort. If we acknowledge that the LeBron James and the Steph Currys and the Michael Jordans of the world didn't get there without hard work, how can we expect any spiritual gain, any spiritual progress without, lighting the midnight oil, as they say, putting in those hours when no one's there, right? We realize that the physical realm has rules and we abide by those rules. But once those rules are placed upon us in the spiritual realm, we say, no, we can't do it. No, I can't wake up for Fajr, it's too difficult. I can't wake up for the Hajj, it's too difficult. I mean, there are certain prerequisites of success, right? And no matter what sphere it is, hard work is the pillar of that. You need hard work in success, no matter what the field. So it definitely requires hard work, and it's not going to be an overnight thing. But salat is something that if you start praying from now, God the Almighty is not such a God who, if you didn't pray before, you have to make up all of those prayers that you missed. God the Almighty, as soon as a man repents, God the Almighty rushes to that person. Well, hadith bhi aati hai na, that if you walk to me, I'll run to you. If you come toward me a hand span, I'll come towards you an arm span. So our God is a God that's ready to forgive, not ready to punish. So we need to see that calling, that God the Almighty is calling me towards him. And we have to pray. There's so many things, and Hazrat Muslim Maud radiallahu anhu, and especially the Prophet Messiah alayhi salam, have expounded upon salat, and there volumes upon volumes have been written on this and have been spoken upon this as well. And so you have to keep in mind, salat is something that is, as I've mentioned before, part and parcel of our spirituality. And once a man came to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he started asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about belief. What is belief? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, belief is to believe in Allah, His angels, His books, His apostles. And the man said, Sadaqt, you have spoken the truth. The companions looked at this man that they've never seen before, and they were like, he just verified what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. What type of a man is this? And the man goes on to say that what is Islam? And the Prophet ﷺ said that Islam is to worship Allah and no one but Allah. And the man said, Sadaqt, you've spoken the truth. And the companions were ready to get on him, because they're like, who is he to verify what the Prophet ﷺ has said about Islam? And then the man asked, what is ihsan? Meaning perfection. And the Prophet ﷺ said that ihsan is to worship Allah as if you are viewing Allah, as if you see Allah face to face. And if you cannot achieve this state, then ihsan would then be to imagine that Allah is watching you. And the man said, Sadaqt. And the man walked away. And the companions were so perplexed. And the Prophet ﷺ looked at his companions, and he said that that was Gabriel, and he came to teach you about the faith. So ihsan is something that we're praying as if we see Allah, right? If one stands in a court, one is very vigilant, or it stands in the presence of someone who he respects or is respectable, like the president or the prime minister. Such a person would wear their best clothes and stand in a way that's very respectable. Salat is when you stand in front of the creator of the worlds, of the universe, and it is your humble plea in front of him. And so if we view salat as something, not as a burden, but as a conversation to Allah the Almighty, that's something that I think that would be very fruitful, especially for those Khuddam that are having a hard time. And salat and concentration with salat is something that I will say 99.999% of people struggle with, right? I remember in 2016, Hazur Anwar Ayyadallah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, he came to Canada and we had a mulaqat with him. We were blessed with a mulaqat. And somebody asked Hazur Anwar Ayyadallah that how can we maintain concentration in our prayer? And Hazur Anwar asked him that, how long do you think you concentrate for in your prayer? And then he said, I concentrate most of the time, but sometimes my mind goes here and there. And the promise, and Hazur Anwar Ayyadallah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz said that if your mind goes, agar idhar udhar hota kabhi kabhi, phir theek hai. Like then you're really pious. And what he was saying was that it's extremely hard to stay focused in prayer, right? It's salat. God the Almighty says, Aqimus salat. Aqimus salat. Aqim means to make it stand, because salat is something that always is falling. And if we're not attentive, even for a moment, it's going to fall. We're going to think about what we had for lunch and what we're going to do tomorrow. But to constantly fight that inclination to think about those things, that is virtuous. If somebody thinks about something but makes his prayer stand up again, that person would be worthy of virtue, of sawab in the sight of Allah Ta'ala. So these are some things that I wanted to emphasize, and at the end, I want to emphasize this, that the more automatic something becomes, the more mindless it becomes. Salat should not be something that we do out of habit, because then it loses that. Some awliya, some very righteous saints of Allah have said that if salat 5 times a day is too easy for you, then there's no spiritual reward in it, right? You have to strive. You constantly have to be in a state of striving and to being mindful of salat. And so that is something that we can pray for. We cannot focus on salat without praying that God the Almighty. There's a prayer of the Prophet ﷺ that somebody came to him and he said, I can't focus on salat. What should I read? Prophet ﷺ said that in sajda, when you go home, read that, oh Allah, my heart is blind, and in a few days I will be raised to you. And if you do not cure me and grant me sight, then I will be raised amongst the blind. So grant me this sight. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, if one repeatedly prays in these types of words, I paraphrased, but if one repeatedly prays in these types of words, a day will come where his salat will melt his heart. So at the end of the day, we have to pray that we are able to concentrate in salat.
Jazakumullah, Fateen bhai, that was truly answers, the questions that Khuddam have in their mind. And, I guess we're at this point now where we have the tips on how to improve our spirituality and how to maintain our worship. Going back to Qamar bhai, as we wrap up, I'd like to ask is that, what sort of tips can you share with our audience listening on how they can sort of, digitally declutter, whether it's their iPhone space or, their mental space and disconnect? What practical tips can you offer them on someone who really wants to detox from the digital world?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start off with certain elements that are going to be required in order to get to a point where you can detox. And certainly we're going to end it with certain takeaways that you can take with you. As a society, people are they're very afraid, I should say, of being vulnerable, and they want to avoid failure. And so as social media has come to its peak, people are so used to living in a cocoon. And I'm going to define a cocoon as they can live a social media life when all the opinions they have, everyone agrees with. They can follow people that have like-minded thinking. So those habits start creeping into yourself. You start getting very comfortable in your situation. If you're on your phone all day, you're very comfortable just seeing life through that phone. And so to all of our Khuddam and all of our listeners, accept vulnerability and failure. And what I mean by that is make yourself vulnerable to new experiences. It is mentally invigorating. It is going to push your limits. And when you push your limits, you are not only going to grow as an individual, but as to my prior point, you are going to grow spiritually because you're trying to better yourself. And ultimately, Islam was created to better yourself. It was to believe in one God, however, to try to achieve the best spiritual and physical state you can get to. And so when I look at examples of individuals that have become very successful in this world, we talked about basketball, but even businessmen, whether you're in various industries, they are working hard, but they're also every day making themselves vulnerable to failure, but also success. Okay, so this is an important concept we need to grasp, that we must allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And how can we do that? Learning a new skill, making a new friend, trying out new experiences, whether it's something that you know you're not good at or something that you want to achieve. Make a list of 3 skills that you want to attain that do not involve being in front of a screen. It's very simple. So for myself, a couple of years ago was I'd like to be in the mountains a little bit more. We're in Calgary, Alberta, which in my opinion is the most beautiful city in Canada. Perhaps my colleagues will not agree with that, but it is one of the most beautiful. And we are close to the Rocky Mountains. And so by the grace of Allah, we have the opportunity to partake in activities within half an hour that allows us to be in the mountains. And so one of my lists was I want to get good at skiing just because it allows you to disconnect from everything. You're just out there. And this is a skill that I did not have in my life. And there's other skills like hiking. We have a lot of Khuddam who hike in the mountains to do rock climbing. And I have to say that these are skills that then become addictive in your life because you want to keep seeking those experiences. You're making yourself better. But I cannot say in words how close you feel to Allah when you're on top of a mountain, whether it's skiing or hiking, it's very quiet. All you hear is wind. You can feel the cold in your gloves, in your forehead, in your ears. But what you hear is just stillness. And that stillness, I guarantee you, will bring you closer to Allah because it gives you time to ponder. Okay? So one of the most important things is allowing yourself to be vulnerable and allowing yourself to grow. Okay? So one of the practical things that you can do today is distance yourself from your devices, as I mentioned. As much as you can, be in a separate room. If you're going out for dinner with family or your friends, put away your phones and have real conversations. Okay? Second thing that you can do immediately is delete some applications. Limit yourself to certain social media platforms. Again, you don't want to be a Swiss Army knife that's okay in everything. You look at all the followers that you have or different influencers, they're not on every platform, they're on one platform. So what I would say to you is pick a couple of apps, reduce your apps immediately by 50%. You do not need the amount of apps you have on your phone. Third, turn off your notifications. Your notifications are equivalent to someone ringing the bell of your house. So imagine if someone was ringing your bell every single minute or every 5 minutes. That's a distraction to your life. So turn off your notifications, 50% reduction of applications, and wherever you can, distance yourself from your devices, whether it's your TV, your laptop, your phone, your iPad, whatever it is, distance yourself for a portion of the day. And as Fateen previously mentioned, when he didn't have his device in the 7th year he got it, he wished he didn't have it. And I'm sure it's because now it's become a nuisance. And so we need to put up pillars that have a filter to these devices that are always seeking our attention. And remember, you're not living life for your devices. Your devices are a tool to live your life. They're just one tool in a toolkit. They're not the only tool. And do not let it become the only tool in your life. And I can speak from experience, your life is going to have much deeper meaning if you can disconnect from these various tools that, again, are just tools to further improve your life. They're not the only tool. So I hope that answers your questions.
Jazakallah, Qamar, that was amazing. Especially with new experiences and, travel and nature, right? I think regardless of where you live, there's nature all around us. Even, beautiful gardens, even in the city of Toronto, if you were to visit a park, there's, something to appreciate and be grateful all around us. And, there's a reason why gratitude and reflection is a sort of element of spirituality. Allah Ta'ala says to travel on earth and see what I have created, and that, whether we are remembering, it's important to remember Allah, whether we're standing, sitting, lying on our sides. And Allah Ta'ala says that, look, He hasn't created something without any purpose. And so when we reflect on this, there's those experiences that really jolt us. So I really echo your thoughts, and those are really helpful. I guess the last question that I have for Fateen, and this is more so about the individual and their relationship that nobody else knows about, is how do you promote, moral accountability? Our personhood, is much more greater than, than the device in our hand. But there's also an accountability that we should also look inwards to, in terms of our media consumption habits. And so, Fateen bhai, I would leave you with this last question. If you can tell more about, what the Khuddam can do to be more accountable with his media consumption habits.
I think the first thing that anyone should do is have an honest conversation with yourself. Candid, no one's around. If I'm alone, Fateen, what's going on? You're spending so much time on your phone. You could be doing. You have to be really honest with yourself, because they say that the first rule of therapy, or rather, in order for you to be eligible for therapy, is you have to realize that you have a problem. If you don't realize that there's a problem, then you have to then you can't. Nothing can be done, because you're just going to be like, no, I'm like Qamar Sahib was mentioning. You're not going to be vulnerable. You're going to be like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. You have to realize that you could be in a better state of mind. You could have a better quality of life, better relationships, more meaningful relationships. And so you have to have this conversation with yourself. And I think if you do that very honestly, you'll come to the conclusion where many of us will say that, for example, my social media use is a little bit too much. And you don't have to go cold turkey, but reduce it day by day. Okay, if I now you were speaking about an app, Shakil Sahib. Now I think in our phones there's an application. If we go to that in the settings, it'll tell us how long we spent on each specific app. So we need to look at that. And when I looked at it, and I only realized this recently, I was shocked because I thought I was using my phone at least 3 or 4 hours less than I actually was. And so these things are definitely a conversation that you need to have first and foremost with yourself. And you have to be, like Qamar Sahib said, you have to be vulnerable. You have to realize that you are not perfect and you were not born perfect, because we have to constantly work hard and evolve. And so humility is something that we have to adopt. Accountability is all about introspection, and it's something that we have to pray for. There are different degrees of accountability. Someone who, for example, a very righteous person, something that is not considered a sin, someone who's not righteous, a sin for him, a righteous deed for him is a sin for a saint. So a righteous deed for a sinner may be a sin for a saint. So there are different levels of accountability. Now, you can't expect yourself to raise your degree so high, your degree of accountability, that you simply fall off. You experience burnout, because that's a real thing. A lot of people, they do experience burnout. So we need to go slow and steady. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ once said that one of the actions that is most beloved to Allah is an action which, even if it is small, it is done consistently. So even if it's small, even if you cut out 5 minutes, in a matter of 12 days, 2 weeks, you'll be down a whole hour of screen use. And then you'll realize slowly, as Qamar Sahib was alluding to, that you don't need it, right? It's not, you're going to realize that you're not reliant on these things and they don't control you. Rather, as he rightfully mentioned, they are a tool that you use for communicating or whatever information or whatever the case is. And so you need to be honest with yourself and you need to pray for yourself. And I think the last thing that I'd say is something that the Prophet Islam and the Holy Quran mention as well. You need to have good company. Social media is also company. The people you follow, the posts that you see, they have an impact on you. They have an effect on you. There's a saying that you are the product of your 5 closest friends, that you are the average of them. And so even if that's not 100% true, we look at your 5, if the 3 of us analyze our 5 closest friends and we look at ourselves, we're going to be like, you know what, I'm not so different from those people. And so we really need to up our levels of who we keep as friends, who we keep as confidants. And I think that's very important in all spheres of life, not only spiritually, but even, as a businessman, I'm not a businessman, but I can say with surety that people who want to be successful businessmen will try to get into contact with other successful businessmen. That's just the way the world works. And so I think, a combination of these things and just being honest with yourself, I think that's how we can raise our accountability.
The Holy Quran in chapter 4, verse 135, Allah Ta'ala tells us, O ye who believe, be strict in observing justice and be witnesses for Allah, even though it may be against yourselves. Whether he against whom witness is born be rich or poor, Allah is more regardful of them both than you are. Therefore, follow not your low desires, that you may be able to act equitably. And if you hide the truth or evade it, then know that Allah is well aware of what you do. Brothers that are listening in today, You have a duty for your soul. You have a fulfillment towards your body, the spiritual nourishment. Really critically think about what you are consuming and who you are around and what you are doing, you know, whether it's public or private. We have a duty towards the soul that Allah gave us, and we don't have much time. So do the best that you can, and inshallah, we hope that this program was a benefit for all of you. In the end, we want our audience to critically reflect on their habits. We definitely do not reject the innovations of the internet age, but instead we reject the way so many people currently engage with these tools. You know, as the social dilemma, the documentary we stated earlier, has directly stated, you know, Tristan Harris directly stated that if the platform is free, then you are the product. So what are you a slave to? And what chains are you trying to unshackle? That was it for today. Jazakallah for Qamar and Fateen. And we hope that you may tune in for season 2 of Dear Soul, as this is our last episode. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب